In 1997, a senator from Delaware stood before Congress and introduced what he called a revolutionary retirement tool for ordinary Americans. His name was William Roth, and the account that would eventually carry his name was sold with a simple, almost elegant promise. Pay your taxes now, let your money grow. Walk away decades later with something the government can never touch again. For millions of working Americans, that sounded like exactly the kind of break the financial system rarely offered. No complicated loopholes, no expensive accountants, just a straightforward path toward retirement security. For decades, people used it exactly that way. They contributed steadily, they watched their balances grow, they told their children to open one as early as possible. Then, in 2021, ProPublica obtained a trove of EARS records that were never supposed to become public. Inside those records was a number so extraordinary that financial journalists had to read it twice. Peter Thiel, one of the wealthiest investors in America, had accumulated approximately $5 billion inside a Roth IRA, tax-free. The retirement account sold to the middle class had quietly become one of the most powerful wealth-sheltering vehicles ever used by the ultra-rich. And almost nobody had noticed. This is the story of how that happened. And more importantly, this is the story of what it reveals about who the financial system actually serves when the rules are the same but the opportunities are not. To understand the gap, you have to understand the original promise. In the mid-1990s, retirement anxiety was spreading quietly through American households. Pension plans were disappearing, corporate loyalty was eroding, Social Security felt increasingly uncertain. Ordinary workers were being handed the responsibility of funding their own futures and handed relatively few tools to do it. The Roth IRA arrived into that environment like a lifeline. Senator Roth framed it as a democratizing force, a way to extend powerful tax advantages to the working and middle class. The account was accessible to almost anyone with earned income. The rules were simple enough to explain in a single conversation, and the core benefit was genuinely compelling. Unlike a traditional IRA, where you contribute pre-tax dollars and pay taxes when you withdraw, the Roth flipped the equation. You contributed money you had already paid taxes on. But from that point forward, every dollar of growth was permanently protected from taxation. When you withdrew the money in retirement, it was entirely yours. For a middle-class family, that distinction was meaningful. Decades of compounding on investments, emerging completely untaxed, represented a real and measurable advantage. People responded. Millions of Americans opened accounts. Financial advisors began recommending them as foundational retirement tools. Personal finance books built entire chapters around the Roth strategy. The message was consistent and optimistic. Follow the rules. Contribute consistently. Let time and compounding do the work. Retire with security. And here's the part of the story that is absolutely critical to hold on to. That promise was not a lie. The Roth IRA genuinely works. Millions of ordinary Americans have built meaningful retirement wealth inside these accounts. For a 25-year-old starting out with modest income, contributing steadily for 40 years, the tax-free compounding advantage is real and significant. The account was not a trick. The product did exactly what it said it would do. But something else was also happening, something that the original marketing materials never quite captured. Every financial system carries an invisible assumption, a hidden picture of who the typical user is and what opportunities they have access to. The Roth IRA carried one of those assumptions, and it shaped everything about how the account actually functioned in the real world. For a working adult contributing through wages, the system created a specific experience. Annual contribution limits defined the ceiling. In 1997, the limit was $2,000. Today, depending on age, it sits at roughly $7,000 per year. That ceiling meant that wealth accumulation inside the account was primarily a function of time and market returns. If you contribute the maximum allowed, year after year, for 30 or 40 years, and the market grows at historical average rates, the math produces a solid but predictable outcome. Financial planners could model it with reasonable accuracy. The numbers were meaningful, but they were also bounded. You are limited by how much you can put in. You are dependent on broad market performance. And you are building wealth at the speed that compound interest allows ordinary assets to grow. That is the middle-class Roth IRA experience. Patient, consistent, genuinely valuable. But the annual contribution limit only controls one part of the equation. It controls how much money enters the account. It says nothing about what that money can be used to purchase once it is inside. This is where the story changes. A Roth IRA is not simply a savings account. It is an investment account. And investment accounts hold assets. The rules govern contributions and withdrawals. They do not govern the nature or the growth potential of the assets held inside. For most ordinary investors, that distinction is academic. They buy index funds, mutual funds, or individual stocks. These are liquid, publicly valued assets. Their growth is real, but measured against broad market performance. But a different category of assets exists, one that rarely enters the retirement planning conversation. Private company equity, pre-EPO shares, founder stakes in early-stage companies. These are not the kinds of assets that ordinary investors typically encounter. They are not available on public exchanges. You cannot log into a brokerage account and purchase them. Accessing them generally requires being part of a specific network, being at the right table when a company is being formed, having the kind of relationships that generate invitations most people never receive. And here is the critical mechanism. These assets can increase in value not by 2% or 10% annually, but by hundreds or thousands of times their original purchase price in the event of a successful exit. This is not speculation in the traditional sense. It is a fundamentally different class of opportunity, with a fundamentally different relationship to the concept of growth. When an asset like that is held inside a Roth IRA, the implications are extraordinary. Every dollar of that appreciation is shielded from taxation permanently. The account structure, designed to protect the retirement savings of a middle-class worker, becomes something else entirely when the asset inside it generates that kind of return. The ProPublica investigation revealed the specific mechanism that Peter Thiel had used. In the early days of PayPal, before the company had any meaningful public valuation, Thiel purchased founder shares at a price of approximately 1/10 of a cent per share. The shares were valued at almost nothing. Because at that stage of a startup, almost nothing is exactly what they were worth on paper. Those shares were purchased inside his Roth IRA. When PayPal was eventually acquired by eBay, and when Thiel's subsequent investments compounded through the following years, including his early stake in Facebook and his fund's other positions, the account that had been seeded with nearly worthless founder equity grew into something that defied the imagination of the account's original architects. Approximately $5 billion, tax-free. The account did not create the fortune. That point is essential. The account simply provided the legal structure within which extraordinary asset appreciation was permanently sheltered from taxation. The Roth IRA functioned exactly as designed. The investment inside it simply operated at a scale and at a speed that the framers of the legislation almost certainly never modeled. And this is where the story becomes bigger than one person. Thiel's case is dramatic because of the numbers. But the broader pattern it reveals was not unique to him. Congressional Budget Office analysis has consistently shown that the retirement tax benefits generated by accounts like the Roth IRA flow disproportionately toward higher income households. Not because the rules are written unfairly on their face, But because the returns on assets held by wealthier investors tend to outpace the returns available to ordinary investors by a significant margin. The participation gap reinforces this pattern. Lower income households contribute to retirement accounts at substantially lower rates, not out of financial irresponsibility, but because contribution requires surplus. It requires money that is not already spoken for by rent, healthcare, childcare, and the compounding pressures of ordinary expenses. When a family is spending everything they earn simply to maintain stability, the concept of maximizing an annual contribution limit belongs to a different economic reality. Higher income households contribute more consistently, for more years, starting earlier, and into accounts that hold assets with higher potential returns. The gap between those trajectories grows larger with every passing decade. What this reveals is something more subtle than a policy failure. It is a psychological story as much as an economic one. Most people believe that wealth is built primarily by choosing the right financial vehicle, open the right account, follow the right strategy, stay disciplined. The results will follow. That belief is not entirely wrong. Discipline and consistency genuinely matter. The right accounts genuinely help. But the outcomes that capture headlines, outcomes that dwarf ordinary retirement wealth by orders of magnitude, are rarely explained by account selection. They are explained by access, by timing, by networks that provide early entry into opportunities that exist before the rest of the market can see them, by stability that allows capital to be committed and held across long time horizons, by relationships that generate invitations most people never receive. The account matters. What goes inside it matters more. And who gets to decide what goes inside it often depends on forces that have nothing to do with financial discipline. None of this means the Roth IRA is a flawed product. That conclusion would miss the point entirely. For a 30-year-old contributing consistently, holding a diversified portfolio, allowing compounding to work across decades, the Roth IRA remains one of the most genuinely valuable retirement tools available to ordinary investors. The tax-free growth advantage is real. The flexibility is real. The long-term benefit is measurable and meaningful. The account did not fail the people it was designed to serve. Millions of Americans are building real retirement security through exactly the mechanism William Roth envisioned. The question is not whether the account works. The question is whether everyone who holds one is playing the same game. In 1997, William Roth stood before Congress and described a retirement tool for ordinary Americans. He was not wrong about the tool. What he may not have fully anticipated was that the same legal container, designed to protect a middle-class family's retirement savings, could also serve as a tax-free vault for assets that most ordinary investors would never encounter, never be invited to purchase, and never even know existed. The Roth IRA wasn't broken. It worked exactly as designed. The real question is whether the people who benefited most from it were ever the same people it was originally sold to, and whether the distance between those two groups tells us something important about how the financial system quietly rewards access above almost everything else. If this made you think differently about how financial systems actually work, subscribe, new investigations drop every week,